Hey, discerned listeners, a lot of you have been asking me to react to the news that Jennette McCurdy came out with a book named I Am Glad My Mom Died. I'm glad my mom died. It's a memoir. She's basically saying that she's glad that her actual mother died. So let's get to it. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. Let's watch.
For you, what were the pitfalls of child fame?
You're playing an adult's game. You're in an adult's world, and you don't recognize that. You're incapable of being on that level, but you are confused and you think that you are. And I think it really leads to stunted personal development.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I obviously haven't been through that, but I've heard a number of stories from people about this, being child stars, and then as adults they will talk about their experience. I think for many people it's fine, or it's a neutral thing, or even a positive thing for people to be child stars, but I think for many people it's not. And you know, I've talked about this frequently, that when children consent, because they have to consent to being on a show or consent to being on a reality TV show, but I think all of us understand that children don't have the wherewithal, the knowledge, the wisdom to know what they're consenting to. They might even be enthusiastic about it, like, yes, I want to be on that show. But do we really think that children know what they're getting into? I don't think anyone thinks that. So I don't think any kid, maybe 16, you can start to say that maybe they, well, even then, I don't think so. So I just think that children should be left out of the industry entirely. And I'm sure that'll never happen, but particularly reality TV. But anyway, so she's saying it's like living in an adult world. And as she's saying that, I'm thinking, yeah, that's true. You're working, one, right? You have a job as a child. I mean, you're instantly in a world of adults. And not even just adults, but also kind of high-level adulthood. I think for a lot of us, we wouldn't be able to handle the pressure of being on a famous TV show, right? So they get a paycheck. They have to think about where they're going to put their money. There's a lot of people wanting to get at their money. There are contracts, there's bosses, there's coworkers. There are a lot of limitations on your freedoms, this sort of thing. It's absolutely an adult world. And what she's saying is that when you're a kid, you think that you're rising to the occasion. You think you can handle it, but you actually can't, and it stunts your development. It probably makes you grow up too fast in a lot of ways and denies you the childhood and the development that you deserve.
You describe it with one line that stuck with me, that the air in the house felt like a held breath.
It was really complicated. My mom also had cancer when I was 2 years old. That was the first time she was diagnosed. So not only was it chaotic because of the abuse that was happening, and my mom's violent and erratic, unstable behavior.
Okay, so again, I think the big controversy about this book, the main controversy, is that she named it, I'm Glad My Mom Died. Actually, let's look at the cover.
It's an experience that you can only relate to if you've been in it.
Well, now former Nickelodeon star Jennette McCurdy is ready to let us all in on her experience of being a child actor. In her new memoir, I'm Glad My Mom Died.
I'm glad my mom died, and she's there with what seems to be an urn, maybe with her mom's ashes. And at first you're like, oh, this must be some sort of comedy book or a fictional book. But when you actually learn about it, it's a memoir. It's a memoir about her life, and she actually is, to some extent, glad that her mom died. And she talked earlier about being abused by her mom, and she's being attacked by people saying that she doesn't have a heart. How could you possibly say that about your mom? And as a therapist, I'm here to tell you that when you are abused horrifically, it's not uncommon, or even if you're just moderately abused, it's not uncommon for the children to have mixed feelings when their parent dies. They might have grief, they might have sadness, they might have loss, but they might also have some relief, they might have some joy, they might have some closure, they might also have some anger that is finally able to come out because they weren't able to express it before because they worried that their parents would come after them emotionally somehow or otherwise. So if you've never been abused by a parent and you see this and you think, how could you possibly say that about your mom? Just try to extend yourself into someone's shoes who's been through a lifetime of abuse. And she's not only talking about the abuse that she went through, it sounds physical and emotional, but also that her mom forced her, essentially, according to what she's saying, into child stardom, that she didn't necessarily really want to do it. And she was pushed into it and pushed harder to work harder by her mom. Her mom was working vicariously through her. It sounds like the mom probably went through a fair amount of abuse herself when she was a child and had a lot of self-esteem issues. Jennette was talking about that, how her mom lacked self-esteem and was desperate for any kind of self-esteem, and probably saw Jennette being a star on TV as a vehicle to get some self-esteem. And so this is why we need to help people. If the mom had received therapy or help or support prior, or even in the early years of Jennette's life, maybe this could have been changed.
Jennette started filming the sitcom when she was just 14 years old and explains in her book that her seemingly glamorous life was a facade. Telling the New York Times, quote, "My whole childhood and adolescence were very exploited. It still gives my nervous system a reaction to say it."
Okay, I'm not sure exactly what she's saying there, but what I interpret that is she's saying, when I say my childhood and adolescence were very exploited, as she's saying that in the interview, she's saying, and my nervous system has a reaction to say that. If you've ever had any kind of trauma, even if you don't rise to the level of PTSD, you might be able to relate to this. You tell a story or you have a memory and your body you have an adrenaline reaction. Your hands start to sweat, your heart starts to race a little bit. It sounds like that's what she's talking about, that she has a lot of fear, a lot of terror, a lot of exploitation, a lot of pain, a lot of abuse that she went through from various different people, her mother, the Hollywood institutions. And now that she's able to talk about it, I hope she's received a lot of therapy and continues to get that. Everyone should be in therapy. But it sounds like when she remembers that, it triggers that and she has a physical reaction. And by the way, if you ever have that feeling, it's an indication that recovery and healing is something that you deserve, and a therapist is a perfect person to talk with. You want to talk with someone that specializes in that kind of trauma.
In many ways, your mother tried to keep you a child.
Yeah, I think my mom wanted to keep me as controllable as possible. I think she really wanted to have her influence on me, and me growing up was a threat to that.
The key to that was calorie restriction.
Absolutely. I think my mom encouraged and conditioned my anorexia because both she thought that it would in some ways help my career, and also because it served her goal of keeping me young and under her influence.
Yeah, that's just horrific. I mean, just imagine that you're a child, you're innocent, you're vulnerable, and the one person who is supposed to be absolutely in your corner with unconditional love and support and protect you from the outside world is not only pushing you into abusive situations and abusing you as well, but also trying to keep you a child, keep you under control, and get inside of your mind by telling you that you're not good enough because you're not thin enough. And I will say that I, for a time, specialized in eating disorders, and the vast majority of the time I found that the individual suffering from an eating disorder, particularly if it was moderate to severe, not only went through significant abuse growing up, but also had interesting relationships with one's parents. The parents might not necessarily be abusive, but the parents often had their own issues regarding eating and body image that would rub off on the kids, sometimes in very overt, obvious ways. And so she's describing that not only did she go through abuse, but she also was encouraged directly to engage in calorie restriction, and that developed, from the sound of it, into diagnosable anorexia. Yeah, I've worked with people like this, and it can be a very difficult experience. You know, if you've never experienced that before, or you don't know anyone with an eating disorder, it can look like, well, you know, just stop it, right? It's ingrained, it gets deep into your personality, and it's very hard to change the behavior. It's very hard to change the mindset without significant treatment, long-term treatment, often trauma treatment, which can take sometimes 10, 20 years of recovery. It's a very difficult thing to overcome. And so, you know, I feel bad for her.
She describes how her mother would give her showers and touch her invasively until she was a teenager.
She referred to them as medical exams on your private parts.
Yes. This was the hardest part of the book for me to write about. It was a really emotional experience. I laughed during the writing of it, and then I cried a lot after I wrote that vignette.
You talk about...
Wow. It's hard to know why those things happen without more information. Sometimes it is pedophilia, attraction to children. Sometimes it's a desire to control the child. Sometimes it's psychopathy. You actually don't really care about other people. You might have some sadism as well, and children are just easy targets. The person would love to abuse anyone, but they just know that children are easier to abuse and are less likely to talk back, are easier to control. And so the psychopathic sadists will actually abuse children, not because they prefer to abuse children, but just because they're easy targets. So I don't know what is going on with the mom, but that's another thing that I'll hear as well from clients, that, and research shows this as well, that when you have a fair amount of enmeshment on one's body, whether it's through physical abuse, sexual abuse, the victim will grow up with this ongoing feeling that they don't have any control over themselves, and they don't even have control over their body. They don't have control over their mind. And when we have that experience, it's very unnerving. And especially when you don't have a parent to run to, right? You know, for people that are raised well enough, when you have a child that's scared, they run to their parents, right? Well, imagine if your parent is the one that is the monster. Where do you run? You're completely alone. It's just horrific. And one of the coping mechanisms, and there are many developed coping mechanisms, dissociation, etc., but one of them is an eating disorder, where you will learn, well, at least I have control over this. And it's kind of in line with what my mom wants. That's what it sounds like Jennette's saying, is that the mom wanted her to remain thin, wanted her to remain small, and maybe didn't want her to develop as a woman physically. And so if she kept her a child, she could keep her in childlike roles. She could keep her in a childlike position to her, and in terms of mother-daughter relationship. This has echoes of Michael Jackson, actually, a little bit. Anyway, so it sounds like Jennette is developing this not only to please the mom, of just like, well, if I really restrict and I really clamp down on myself and deny myself what I need in terms of sustenance and nutrition, I will please her, and maybe then I'll finally get the approval that I'm looking for. I'll finally get her to love me. Maybe she'll stop abusing me. Maybe she'll let me go. But it's actually playing into the hands of the abuser, because the abuser is using that to actually control the person. And that's the insidious nature of this. So the individual's like, well, maybe I can finally get that. And then also it's a method of actually getting some control over one's life. Children who are in this situation, they will often feel very proud of themselves. Like, look at me. I managed to only eat an apple today. Look how successful I am. And then the parent is there going, good job. And so for once in my life, not only am I getting praise and love from my mother, but I also feel competent and accomplished, and look what I can do, and look at my results, and everyone else is, less than me, and you just have a little shred of self-esteem. All the while, you're denying yourself what you need and developing a disorder that could literally kill you. A fair percentage of people with this disorder actually die from it, and then that's not even talking about the depression and the suicidality that can result from it. But anyway, so Jennette is, I think, raising awareness of that.
You talk about basically having out-of-body associations, out-of-body experiences when this is happening to you.
Yeah.
What do you think was going on?
I've tried to understand, and that didn't lead me anywhere productive. I would just spin my wheels trying to understand my mom's motives.
I think the interviewer was thinking of the word dissociation. She was saying you would actually have out-of-body associations. And so I think maybe Jennette was using the word dissociation. But anyway, so I don't know, but for people that go through experiences like that, it's not uncommon to dissociate. Whether you develop a dissociative disorder or not depends on a lot of factors, but the defense is available to all of us, particularly when you are a child, in that you're going through something very difficult, very scary, very invasive, very harmful, very abusive, and you feel powerless, you don't know what to do. Well, our brains, our psychologies have a mechanism available to us, clearly, because children will develop this, that when you go through those experiences, you will check out, you will become very distant, you sort of try to pull away psychologically from the experience because you can't get away physically. And if you do this repeatedly and it's intense enough, you can actually develop a dissociative disorder that can last into adulthood, where you will have a minor stress or a major one, but even a minor stress like your boss is disapproving of you, and you will dissociate, not because you're actually in danger, but it feels like danger. It has the smell of danger, similar to the way it was when you were a child. And it'll become very difficult because you don't want to dissociate in the middle of a work meeting, that kind of thing, or when you are trying to have an intimate moment with your partner. And of course, go to therapy. There are people who specialize in dissociative disorders. There are scientifically proven ways to manage it and to mitigate the effects, to get support, and to lower the incidence of them. So make sure that you get those kinds of therapies. The other thing that Jennette is answering is, what do you think was going on with your mom? Why would your mom do that? And there's two things I'll say. One is that we often don't ask those questions if it was a father or an uncle or a man who was sexually abusing their child. We generally know in our society at this point that there are some people that have a compulsion to do that, and we don't ask why. We're just like, well, there are people that do that. But when it's a woman, when it's a mother, I often will hear this question. It's like, well, why would she do that? I'm going to tell you, people, women can be sexual predators and are sexual predators. Of the sexual predators on the planet, a pretty good percentage, a minority of the predators are women, are mothers. So all the associations you have with a sexual predator, a woman can be that. We almost never see a depiction of that. In fact, I can't think of a single one off the top of my head. We don't talk about this topic in general very often, but certainly when it comes to women. And there are plenty of people, maybe people listening and watching right now, who have been through that experience. They have been sexually abused by an older woman or even by their mothers, and they feel like something's wrong with them. They're just like, well, it felt abusive, but mothers don't abuse people. So, the other thing I'll say is that Jennette is like, yeah, I tried to figure out what would motivate my mom to do that to me? Like, what's going on there? And Jennette's saying, I tried and tried. I couldn't really figure out anything. And I just figured it probably wasn't a fruitful endeavor to try to figure out why my mom would do that. There's a possibility that she's looking for some way of saying, it's not my fault, right? Because a lot of people who have been abused, they'll say it's their fault. So Jennette probably internalized a lot of blame and said, I must have done something, or I must not have been a good enough kid. Certainly children will believe that. And even adults who know better, who have learned other things, they still on the inside mostly still believe that there's something wrong with them and that they brought it on, or if they were a better person, it wouldn't have happened. She's why would my mom do that? Why would that happen? So let me provide my top hypotheses. If I had a client who came to me, the mother came to me and said, I did this, and we were about to explore that for several months, I would develop some hypotheses up front and start to explore those areas to try to confirm or deny the hypotheses. And one of which is that the individual is a sadist, that they actually take pleasure in harming other people, and children are just easy targets. Another one is that they are a psychopath and they don't care about other people's feelings and thought it might be interesting to do to someone, or to get inside of their brain and say, I have full control over you, and that kind of thing. That's very disturbing to think about, right? She also could have been a compulsive pedophile who didn't necessarily have psychopathy or sadism, meaning that people like this sometimes do have empathy and do care about other people and don't want to harm other people, but they have a strong compulsion because they're untreated and they can't control their compulsion, and they end up harming other people, children, even though they're not setting out to do that. So there's that possibility. That's very complicated. I could talk about that for a while, but I won't. Another possibility is that the mother had this behavior modeled to her when she was young. She might have been abused, or at least investigated in the same way that she investigated Jennette, and she thought it was actually important to do it that way, like it was some part of her parental duty, because that's what was modeled to her, and her parents had that done to them when they were young. That kind of thing is sort of an abusive pattern that was passed down through the generations. So those would be the top hypotheses I would develop, just as a generic set of hypotheses. I just want to throw those out there. It could be all those things. It could be a number of those things, or it could be 10,000 other possibilities. But I want to be clear, because sometimes people misunderstand me. When I'm trying to conceptualize, sometimes it will provoke compassion, right? If Jennette's mother went through abuse and it was modeled to her and then she abused Jennette, I'm not saying that it's okay. Okay, I want to be clear about that. I'm not saying it's okay that Jennette's mother did those things, regardless of what the mother's childhood was like. I'm also not saying that you're supposed to put up with it if it's happening, because it's like, well, my mother went through some stuff, so I guess this is what's happening. No one deserves to be abused. And if you're ever being abused, you have every right, regardless, say your parents are abusing you, or your spouse is abusing you, and you know that your loved one went through horrific abuse when they were young, and they are actually treating you much better than what they went through when they were young. And you're just like, well, I know why this is happening, and so what should I do? You never deserve to be abused. You always deserve to be safe and to not be treated that way, regardless of why it's happening.
Continued until you were 17?
Yeah.
And you describe in the book that you felt violated.
Yes, I absolutely felt violated, and eventually accepting that was the most, I think, integral piece to my own healing and recovery.
Okay, it's hard to know. They're rushing through this interview, but it sounds like she's saying that when she recognized that that was a violation, that was a big part of her recovery. And I'm guessing what she means is that prior to that realization, she thought that those invasive, horrific, abusive experiences that she went through were normal, or she deserved it, or her mom had justifications. And when she realized, no, that was wrong, that should not have happened. My mom did something wrong to me, and it had nothing to do with me. And yeah, it's a huge step forward in terms of recovery. And it might seem like an obvious conclusion, but believe me, children who go through this, they almost never have that conclusion because they're brainwashed into a way of thinking, or forced to think that way. Because imagine you're 10 years old and you start to think, wait, I don't think this is okay. And you're in total control of your abusive parent. And you start to indicate something like, I don't know if I want to do that. Well, if the abusive parent, they might double down, right? So now you're in a conundrum. You can either continue going down that road of discovery and rational thought and say, no, I'm pretty sure this is wrong. Well, that will cause more abuse, more withdrawal. That's because that's the other insidious thing about this, is that the parent who's abusing you is often your closest attachment figure and the person you depend on the most. And the abusive person might also be very helpful to you, might actually protect you at times and be a very important person in your life, right? So again, if you go down that road of discovery, and you're like, I don't think this is right. Not only are you getting more abuse potentially, but you're also getting withdrawal of the one person that you think is that you feel is in your corner. Or you can choose another route of denial, where you just say, no, this is all fine. There's nothing wrong here. My mom is wonderful. Everything is fine. This is normal, or this isn't happening. I'll just forget it. So it's much easier and much more likely that the child will go down that road, because to go down a road to say that I deserve better is to actually incur so many horrific consequences in comparison to the already horrific experiences that they're going through. All right, well, let's end it there. And then next time I'll pick up and react to more of the story and more of her interviews. And until then, everyone out there, please take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.